So it's tax return time here in America, and instead of being responsible and paying off debt with your tax refund, you decide you quote unquote need a new baitcaster. So let's say you set a price limit of around $200. Now, what would be the best baitcaster for your money? Now, to be honest, today in 2024, the $200 baitcasters are just as good as the $300 baitcasters of just 5 years ago. So the question is, in the entire world, what is the best baitcaster for around 200 bucks? Well, we're going to find out today. Now, here in the United States, there is a clear king of the $200 price point when it comes to baitcasters, and that reel is the Shimano Curado MGL 150. There's nothing from DAIWA, GARCIA, LEWS, or any other brand that can touch the Curado MGL 150 when it comes to all-around performance and versatility. But over in Japan, we have another reel that's around $200 that's just as good in my experience, and that's going to be the mighty Shimano SLX DC XT. It's another reel that can literally do it all and has no weaknesses. Now, coincidentally, the Curado MGL 150 is not for sale in Japan, and the SLX DC XT is not for sale here in America. So basically it's going to be the JDM SLX DC XT battling the USDM Curado MGL 150 for the $200 baitcaster crown. So let's get started. Now I'm going to be comparing these reels in 3 different categories. Number 1 is going to be on paper specs. Number 2 is going to be looks and ergonomics. And number 3, of course, is going to be performance. Of course, all of this is going to be based on my personal experience and opinions, but I will use hard numbers when I can. So when it comes to on paper specs, let's go down the specs I feel that are the most important when it comes to bass fishing, since these are both bass fishing reels. When it comes to reel weight, the Curado just barely edges out the SLX with a weight of 6.66 ounces versus 6.86 for the SLX. Now, when both reels are spooled up full width 30-pound braid, the gap between the two gets slightly narrower, but the Curado MGL will still hold a slight advantage in weight. Now, honestly, I thought the weight difference was much bigger between the two, but I guess I was wrong. So the winner here, just barely, is going to be the Curado MGL. Now, next up is going to be ball bearing count. Now, neither of these reels has a really high bearing count, but the bearings are there where they need to be. But in this category, the SLX DC XT beats out the Curado with a bearing count of 7+1 versus 6+1 for the Curado. And also, being a JDM Shimano, the SLX will have the JDM Shimano bearings, which seem to spin better than the American market bearings that the Curado uses. So the winner here, of course, is going to be the SLX. Now, next up is going to be the drag. So Shimano prioritizes a smooth drag versus outright huge stopping power, so neither reel is going to blow anyone away when it comes to sheer numbers. But according to Shimano, the Curado MGL has a max drag pressure of 13 pounds, while the SLX has a little bit less at 5.5 kilos, which equates to 12 pounds. So the winner here is going to be the Curado. Now, last but not least, is going to be the handle and knobs. Now, of course, it's going to be personal preference, but for bass fishing, I feel the Curado has the better handle and knobs. The SLX DC has smaller knobs and also a much less beefy, shorter handle that only comes in 84 millimeters. So it's a very finesse-oriented handle, but the Curado has bigger knobs for more grip surface area, and the handle is much thicker and stouter than the SLX handle, and it also comes in longer lengths of 90 millimeters for the regular and high gear ratios, and 96 millimeters for the XG ratio. And I think the handle and knobs pretty much highlight the differences in how Americans approach bass fishing versus the Japanese, but since I'm American, the Curado wins here. So that's 3 categories for the Curado and 1 for the SLX when it comes to on paper specs. So of course the winner of this category is going to be the Curado. So next up is going to be looks and ergonomics. Now of course this is subjective to each person, and of course both reels are going to be judged by my personal standards. Now when it comes to looks, the SLX just craps all over the Curado, hands down. The shape of the reel is more pleasant to look at. The paint job is much more special looking and makes the SLX look more expensive than it really is. And it's also topped off by a nice glossy clear coat that makes the reel really shine. Throw in a hint of blue and chrome with subtle badging. All this really makes the SLX DC XT a very stunning reel. Now by contrast, the Curado looks like a dull black color until you really get close up and realize the side plates are actually a dark green. Now on the handle side, it's much better with a lot of silver accents to offset the dark body, but color along with its matte satin finish really hide the shape and lines of the Curado. If you want to see what the Curado MGL 150 really looks like, check out the Tranx 150. Now, when it comes to palming ergonomics, it's actually very, very close. I mounted both reels on the same rod, and for some reason, if I really concentrate, the SLX seems to feel slightly heavier, which it is, but I think it's down to the fact that the SLX is more compact and dense, but when it actually comes to palming comfort, it is extremely close. I had to close my eyes and concentrate, but the SLX DC barely edges out the Curado for me when it comes to palming. Not only on the palm side plate, but the position of my ring finger on the handle side. The SLX feels just a little bit smaller and thinner. But don't get me wrong, I really had to take time comparing to nitpick the differences. Both reels are very, very comfortable to palm. But since there are no ties on this channel, the SLX DC wins the looks and ergonomics category. So now we get to the nitty gritty, the actual performance comparison. Now both reels have went against each other in a cast battle already in a previous video, and they also have went through my quote-unquote Can It Bait Finesse testing. So if you want to check out those videos, I'm going to try to remember to leave a link pinned in the top of the comment section, or just wait for the end of the video and you'll see the links posted there. Now for performance, I tested long distance casting, pitching ease and accuracy, and lastly skipping ability. But before we get to the performance results, let's talk about the most important things when it comes to bait casting performance. That's going to be the spool and the brakes. Now when it comes to the spools, the Curado has a slightly smaller 32mm previous generation MGL spool that is wider and much lighter, coming in at 12.87 grams. So to put that into context, the spool of the current mighty METANIUM MGL is only about half a gram lighter. Now the SLX DC has a bigger 33mm MGL3 spool that is also narrower. But because of its brakes, the weight of the spool is 16.9 grams, which is heavy by today's standards for a $200 reel, but it is currently the lightest spool amongst Shimano's DC reels, possibly until the new METANIUM DC finally comes out. So that means that the Curado spool is a whopping 4 grams lighter, or about 25%, but the Curado spool does hold more line, being a 150 capacity Shimano versus the 70 capacity spool of the SLX. So when filled with 30-pound braid, the spool weight gap closes, with the Curado spool weighing in at 19.1 grams and the SLX spool coming in at 21.77 grams. So a 4 gram gap shrinks down to 2.67 grams, and let's not forget the SLX spool is 1mm taller. So now let's get on to the brakes. Now both reels are featuring 2 of the 3 current premier Shimano braking systems, with the SLX DC getting the IDC5 with firmware adjusted for the lower inertia MGL3 spool, and the Curado sports the SVS Infinity, which is the best centrifugal brake system in the world. Now the thing about the Curado MGL 150, its SVS Infinity has 6 arms, whereas most other Shimano reels with this brake system only have 4 arms. So when it comes to brakes, each system theoretically has advantages over the other. So I'm going to say it's a draw. So now it's time to get to these performance results. Now the first time these two reels went head to head in a cast battle, the Curado MGL just barely beat the SLX in a field battle against 4 other reels. Now the lure I casted was a 1/4 ounce square bill using 10-pound monofilament line, and the results were, out of all 6 reels, the Curado came in first with an average of 120.89 feet, but get this, the SLX DC, which had the heaviest spool of the 6 reels by far, came in a very close second place with an average of 119.89 feet, so only a 1 foot difference between the two in casting average. And incidentally, the SLX DC had the longest cast of the battle out of all 6 reels. Now you can say that they were basically even, but it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning is winning, and the Curado won that battle. But what if we casted a crankbait that is over twice as heavy and used braid instead of monofilament? Would the results change? Let's find out. Okay, so here are the results of that battle, and the Curado took a clear and easy win with an average of 142.86 feet, with a couple of casts that went over 150 feet or 50 yards, while the SLX DC could only average 135.44 feet. So the question is, what happened to the mighty SLX? Well, I'm going to give you context as to what happened by showing you this. Yes, the SLX DC easily casted all its line off with about a 75% effort cast. So if the SLX DC held about 10 to 15 more yards of line. I know it could have put up a better fight, but that is the limitation of having the DC brakes and a small diameter spool. So when it comes to casting distance, the winner is going to be the Curado MGL 150 because it holds more line in order to make longer casts. But since I'm the most thorough tackle tester on YouTube, I used my line counter to see how much feet of this 30-pound braid each reel held, and the Curado held right around 200 feet, while the SLX held right around 155 feet. So a whopping 45 feet of difference in line capacity between the two reels. So next up, of course, is going to be pitching. Now on paper, the smaller, lighter spool Curado should easily dominate the SLX in pitching, right? Well, let's check it out. Now in this video footage, I'm not pitching for distance because if you need to pitch anything over 45 to 50 feet, I personally feel it's better to just do an easy roll cast. Now what I'm doing is I'm aiming for the corner of this dock, which was about 10 yards away, and I'm trying to see which reel hit the target easier while keeping a low trajectory. Now the lure I was pitching was a weightless G-Crack Spiron, which weighs about 5/8 of an ounce. So which reel pitched better? I'll have to admit it was extremely close. The Curado pitched farther with the same effort, and if you don't concentrate, you could easily overshoot the target. But here's the thing, the SLX seemed to hit the target with a low trajectory a little bit easier and more consistently. And I think that's down to the consistent nature of the DC brakes. Now for full disclosure, the SLX was set to the braid line mode with the external dial set to either 2 or 3, while the Curado was set to 3 brakes on inside with the external dial set to 3 or 4. So with all that being said, who wins the pitching battle? Well, ultimately I'm going to have to give it to the Curado based on the fact that I feel that it has more pitching ability in reserve. So basically a higher ceiling when it comes to pitching ability. I'm talking more pitching distance while keeping a low trajectory, and I didn't even scratch the surface of how adjustable the brakes are to fine-tune your pitching. While the DC brakes of the SLX were pretty much bottomed out when it came to pitching without having to thumb the spool. So if I messed around with the Curado and let's say only activated 2 or maybe even 1 brake, I feel that it could pitch longer while keeping that same low trajectory. So once again, the winner for pitching is going to be the Curado MGL 150. So now we get to the performance comparison that nobody saw coming, and that is going to be skipping. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, think that the SLX DC with its IDC5 brakes is just going to destroy the Curado with its centrifugal brakes, right? Well, let's find out. So in this footage, I'm just basically skipping out in open water with the dock on the left, giving you reference as to, I guess, how far the skips went. Unfortunately, the places that I found that had structure that I could skip under had such bad lighting that you guys wouldn't be able to see anything going on. So of course I decided to skip out in open water. Now keep in mind, I consider myself a novice skipper, so this test is not about skipping distance, but just how forgiving the reels are if you do a bad skip. So basically that means that if you do a bad skip stroke where the lure doesn't hit the water at a good angle, how bad will the spool blow up if you aren't thumbing it? Now for the SLX, the brakes were set to braid mode internally and the external dial was set to 3. Now in this setting I could pretty much skip almost thumb free, but the distance would not be choked off like it was if the dial was set to either 4 or wind. Now for the Curado, all 6 brakes were turned on and the external dial was set to, I believe, 4. Now both spool tensions were set to just minimize the side-to-side play. Now if you're stunned by the skipping ability of the Curado, don't be. I actually hinted at its skipping ability a couple of years ago when I first got the reel, because I actually filmed a skipping video, but the audio was horrible, so I scrapped it. The Curado MGL 150, because it has the 6-arm SVS Infinity instead of 4, was surprisingly forgiving on bad skips. The extra 2 brake arms provided that much needed stopping power, and I was skipping thumb free for the most part, except for stopping the spool with my thumb at the end. Now even on bad skips, if the spool backlashed, it was very minimal, and I think it's a much better skipping reel than that LEWS Pro SP, which was designed for skipping. So does this mean that the Curado is a better skipping reel than the SLX with its mighty DC brakes? Well, let's talk about it. Now, while the Curado is surprisingly forgiving, with the SLX, you can actually skip thumb free from beginning to end. And I was using the line mode that had the least braking power. If you put the external dial to the wind setting or to number 4, even the worst skips will struggle to blow up the SLX spool. So from a skipping novice standpoint, it's pretty close, but the SLX DC XT wins. Alright, so after putting these reels up against each other, which reel is the winner? Which reel is the best baitcaster around $200? Now hopefully everyone saw that each and every category was extremely close. I'm sure a lot of you were impressed at how good the Curado could skip, or that the SLX DC could cast as far as the Curado up to a certain point. And even ergonomically, it was hard to pick a winner since they're so similar in weight and palm and comfort. But on this channel, there are no ties. So, taking 2 out of the 3 categories, the best $200 baitcaster in the world is the Curado MGL 150. This reel literally has no weaknesses, and everything it does, it's the best at or close to being the best. And it just has a higher performance ceiling than the SLX when it comes to the heavier baits. Now up to 3/8 of an ounce, I don't really think you can separate the two, but any lures heavier than that, you need more line capacity, and the Curado provides that while the SLX DC does not. But if I had to spend my hard-earned money on just one of these 2 reels, it's going to be that SLX DC XT. Alright guys, thanks a lot.